Employee Training to Performance. My name is Jason Silberman, and I'd like to thank you all for attending our webinar today, in which over the course of the next 60 minutes or so, we'll take a look at how we can take the objectives that companies are trying to achieve in training their employees, let's say proficiency, productivity, and something that will lead to overall higher performance, and develop a long-term and effective strategy that will leave a lasting impact. Now, before I get started talking about our presenters and the agenda for today's webinar, I just want to mention that there will be time for answering a few questions towards the end of the webinar. In order to ask a question, feel free to submit it in the chat section on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Additionally, we invite you to ask questions and interact with others on Twitter with the hashtag TrainingNail, which you'll see on the screen is TrainingNail. You all can also see on the screen, if you want to interact with us, the Twitter handles of my blog, T-Station blog, of Axonify, and of WalkMe. We'll keep track of the hashtag, and we'll try to answer some questions a bit later at the end of the webinar. A bit about the presenters today. Again, my name is Jason Silberman. I am the editor and lead writer of a blog called Training Station, which is about issues related to employee learning and performance. I also have a free ebook that we published in May called Express Train, How to Accelerate Employee Time to Competence. If you would like to download the free ebook, or if you would like more information, please just visit my blog. Again, that's Training Station, and you'll be able to get more information from there. I will present about first 5-10 minutes of this presentation and some of the challenges facing employee training managers today, after which Carol Leaman, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Axonify, will then speak. We'll be hearing from two unique providers today. So from Axonify, we'll hear how we can transform employee training into something that's an engaging, empowering, and personalized experience, which will hopefully strengthen the overall impact and bring a return on the investment that we put into it. We will also hear from Ari Tamam of WalkMe, who will discuss best directly link learning to performance and ensure a smooth and quick transition from training to day-to-day tasks. Both Carol and Ari are experts on the field of employee training. We've done several webinars previously relating to employee learning and performance. So I think that you'll find their presentations today insightful and valuable. So before we get started, I'll just go over a bit of the agenda today. I will look at some of the top challenges facing training managers today. Then, accepting that there are those challenges, we'll look at the common goals that any employee training strategy is trying. We'll then hear from, as I mentioned, from Carol Leaman of Axonify on how to motivate and engage employees in the learning process by creating real-time personalized knowledge map, employee by employee, which identifies and closes information gaps. Finally, we'll hear from Ari Tamam from WalkMe on how to provide direct online guidance and employee performance support, which directly links training to performance and ensuring a smooth transition from training to everyday tasks. At the end of the webinar, we will, as I mentioned, have time for some questions as well as a wrap-up, so please stick around for that. I'll also mention that for those who need to leave early or are not attending the webinar today, we will be recording this, and we will be able to share the recording with you in the days following the webinar itself. So let's just look at what I would call the top 3 training challenges facing anybody involved in the learning and development field today. The first challenge I would say is due to the economic recession that we've seen over the last 5+ years around the world. We'll focus on the United States here, but around the world, training departments have faced slashed budgets, budgets that have been limited, and of course, the less money you have to invest in training, the more challenging and creative you have to be. So let's look at some statistics. According to a report by Burson and Associates, training took a hit during the recession. In U.S. corporate training market shrank from, in 2007, $58.5 billion to $56.2 billion in 2008, just a year later, which was the greatest decline, yearly decline in more than 10 years up until then. In 2007, if we look at this through a per employee basis, U.S. companies spent about just over $1,200 per employee, while 5 years later in 2012, the average U.S. company spent just over $700. So you see about a decline of $500 per employee just 5 years later, while some companies, that have a little bit more money, maybe larger enterprises, but also that are more in tune with the importance of training and the money that needs to go into it, they spent on average about $867. There is some good news, we have to say. Overall spending on training, according to Burson, rose 12% on average in 2012 according to surveys from the beginning and middle of this year of 2013. Many businesses were saying that they plan to continue to increase their budgets for employee training and development. But it should be realized we're not back to where we were at pre-recession levels. So there's still a ways to go. The second challenge I'll mention is one. It's a question that's familiar to many in the training field, which is the question of relevance. It's the classic question that employees might ask when faced with training: what's in it for me? What is valuable that you're taking me away from my everyday work, which is what I was hired for to begin with, and to have to endure a process which many times is often seen as something that's boring or burdensome and not relevant to their everyday work. So relevance is important. You do not want to make training too theoretical. You want to make it something that's applicable to their everyday tasks. And you also don't want to overwhelm employees during the training sessions themselves. Now, what I mean by that is that employee training should be seen as a continuous long-term process. It's not a single event and then following which employees perform their tasks. It's not the way things work, especially in a world of fast-changing technology, fast-changing employee turnover, and always new necessary skills that need to be nurtured within the workplace. So if you look at it as a long-term process, I think you can start to develop a strategy that not everything is about cram as much information as you can within the initial training sessions themselves. At the start of their being a new employee, or if in the example of veteran employees, let's say you're migrating to a new software and a new enterprise software, whether it's a CRM or some other type of enterprise software, you don't need to get everything in at the first initial bout. With that said, the second thing that you don't want to overwhelm, you don't want to overwhelm them in each session themselves. I'm sure Carol from Exonify will agree with me on this, that you want to teach them more on short bursts of information. It helps to have breaks in the middle, to not just, again, put so much information that it'll be a bit too overwhelming for them. Humans by nature just don't learn successfully that way, so it's important to keep in mind. Finally, the third challenge I will mention that I think training managers face is the question of impact following the end of the training session. As we mentioned, you want to try to make training a continuous long-term strategy. But how do we make training stick? The topic of the webinar today is how do we employ training to performance? Even in the most successful, engaging, well-executed training, only a portion of the material is fully absorbed and transferred. Many have heard the 20% statistic, whether it's 20% or more. It's still, everybody would agree, it's only a portion of the material that is transferred over. Only a portion of the knowledge that is given is fully transferred and brought into and applied in everyday work. So there is always a gap that exists between the end of the employee training sessions and when the employees can work at a level of proficiency, of accuracy, and independence. And often that gap is the most frustrating time for training managers because you've already put in the money that you put into designing and carrying out at least the initial phases of your employee training strategy, and you want to see some initial results, but sometimes it takes time. Knowledge is often forgotten during that time, errors are made, and employees often turn to the help desk for assistance. So you want to try to shorten that time as much as possible and to make the process as smooth as possible. So with all those challenges accepted, and with this I will end my portion, we want to see what are some common training objectives, out of any, whatever strategy you might have for your employee training and development. So of course you want to get your employees, especially new employees, up to position. You want to raise their performance and efficiency. As we mentioned, you also want to reduce the amount of times that they're asking for help and to take them away from their everyday tasks. You also want to, of course, in terms of the effectiveness of the training itself, you want to create training that is memorable and applicable to everyday work, as we mentioned. You, of course, want to, much has been written about the role of employee training in the larger employee engagement strategy and execution and process. So you want to raise employee satisfaction and motivation to work hard and succeed, thereby creating a fully engaged workforce. And finally, let's be honest, you also want training, we mentioned high performance, to lead to financial results, to lead to company growth, success, and competitiveness. So with that said, I would like to turn things over to Carol Leaman, who is the President and CEO of Axonify. Carol is a well sought out speaker at various events on various topics relating to employee training and development. I'm sure you will find her presentation very engaging and interesting. And so with that said, Carol, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Jason. So I'm going to talk a little bit about brain science and how that helps to cause employees to remember and actually do the right things, and how that relates to the learning market. So the learning market in North America specifically is about $150 billion a year spent. That's what corporate enterprise spends training employees each year, and about $100 billion of that is actually classroom-based instructor-led learning. The other $50 billion is e-learning tools of many different flavors. Unfortunately, though, all of that, most e-learning tools, not all but most, and certainly the classroom-based instruction, don't actually take into account how our brains work to retain information. For example, they don't take account how fragmented our attention spans become, particularly with mobile devices and all of the things that are chewing up our attention today. They also don't personalize or take into account specific individual learning needs, person by person. It tends to be one-size-fits-all content with no way to know where an individual is on a learning path. And it also doesn't take into account younger generation expectations. They have an expectation that employers are going to give them learning at the point of need in a way, shape, and form that's very approachable and fun and social for them. So in a nutshell, most training today still tends to be very event-based. That is, it's one time with no reinforcement after the fact, whether it's in classroom or online. There is no follow-up and no reinforcement to actually understand what a person remembered out of that event. The content is one size fits all. It isn't tailored to specific job titles or individuals. And it certainly isn't fun, social, or gamified. Employees find it extraordinarily boring, attention spans are short, and they tend not to remember much of anything post-training session. Our memory, in fact, starts to degrade almost immediately. They are delivered, those sessions, the content, all at once. That's the synchronous delivery instead of asynchronous, as the employee needs it at the point of need. There's no underlying intelligence to track or understand what a person has remembered, but more importantly, what they haven't remembered. What are those knowledge gaps that exist, and then how can we close those gaps by personalizing content to that specific area of need. And of course, outcomes after a learning event are typically not measurable at all. It's impossible to know what an employer got out of the training investment that they made up front. So that fire hose approach to learning simply doesn't work. Our brains are oriented to taking 4 to 5 bits of information at a time very, very effectively, but not much more than that. And so if we're looking for people to remember things, you have to take into account how the brain works to retain information. Because when employees don't remember what they're supposed to do on the job after the training events occurred, they don't apply it, and that can be extraordinarily expensive, particularly in certain types of applications for those employers. So this particular diagram is something called the forgetting curve, and that term was coined in the 1800s by a scientist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. And Ebbinghaus discovered through a 30-year series of experiments that, in a nutshell, if we as human beings are told a piece of information once, our ability to remember that information 30 days later is less than 10%. But if we're told the same piece of information up to 5 times in a 30-day period of time, we'll actually be able to remember that information long-term greater than 90%. And so the whole concept is the idea of solidifying the pathway in the brain through repetition to create long-term retention. And this has now been replicated thousands of times by other scientists who've measured the exact same effect. So employing these concepts in the learning environment is something we can do, and changing learning to make it that much more an effective experience in the corporate enterprise is something that absolutely needs to happen and is. So the 2 key advances in corporate learning that are highly effective for driving retention are concepts related to brain science and also the way that we use technology today. So on the brain science side, there are 2 key principles that really have an effective impact on driving retention and knowledge. And the 2 are called repeated retrieval, and the second idea is spacing or interval reinforcement. And I'm going to talk about each of them. Retrieval is the concept of going back into your brain and pulling out a key piece of information more than once over a period of time. And it's now been shown by science that that simple act of questioning is much more effective for long-term retention than studying in a large chunk of time with a large body of content. Again, the fire hose approach. So here's a study that was done that measured a first group of students who were subject to a long study period, lots of information all at once, and then went away for a period of 40 minutes and were asked to recall key learning points out of that study period, as opposed to the second group who didn't undergo that initial large body of content, but were simply asked questions and repeatedly. They were also given a 40-minute rest period, and in each case, the students were questioned after the fact about those key learning points. And you can see that those that had simply been asked core questions repetitively had a much more successful rate of retention after the 40-minute period had elapsed than those who had studied it in one large session. Similarly, if you look at studying or other forms of studying, so in the far left column, that is one long session. The second column is actually 2 long sessions, so repeatedly studying a large bulk of content. The third bar, mapping, took that initial study period and related the key concepts to other concepts or maps in our brain that had relational types of items. And then the fourth column, which is simply that questioning of the key learning points with no large study period. And again, you can see that simple questioning, or what's known as retrieval practice, is far superior in terms of long-term retention. The second concept that goes hand in hand with a retrieval-based learning is this idea of spaced repetition. And that is the spacing between which you ask the questions. And so as that spacing increases with each repetition, you can have, again, a very measurable and positive impact on long-term retention. So here's an example of that, where 3 groups of students were asked to recall lists of words. And in the first group, the list of words had no distractor words in between the words to be remembered. The second group had 4 distractor words in between each word to be remembered. The third group had 12 distractor words. And you can see that the group that had the most distractor words spaced in between the ones they were to remember had a greater level of retention. So another way to say that is, if you actually make it hard or harder for the person to go back into their brain and pull out the answer, you can actually solidify the neural pathways much more effectively. So the second advance that has had a very, very important impact on learning in the corporate enterprise is the availability of technology today. And so technology has allowed the learning experience to be very adaptive to the individual, very personalized, because everybody tends to have their own device targeted to that individual's learning path. And with gamification, social, other sorts of things that go on, you can also make that experience highly engaging and fun and approachable for the employee to want to get on and learn and be self-motivated to actually take on a learning event. It should also be very flexible, as in content changing as required, on demand at the point of need, and delivered in a way that allows our brains to actually digest the information. That concept of bite-sized, 4 to 5 bits of information at a time is the way to actually drive retention. And of course, technology has made it accessible on mobile devices, on tablets, on laptops, on point-of-sale terminals in some cases. It can be anywhere, anytime. And this is what employers really need to do today to drive a learning experience that actually gets them value out of the investment that they make upfront when they onboard new employees, or ongoing as they have to deliver changing information. So here's a group of companies that are leading the way in terms of employing the concepts I just spoke about in their learning environment and having a very highly effective experience, both in terms of being able to measure knowledge transfer that relates to what employees then do on the job, but also in terms of the cultural shift and the employee attitude and motivation, and the sense of accomplishment that the employees get. There's been a whole sort of attitudinal shift on the part of the employee culture. Here's a specific example of a retailer in the U.S. called the Pep Boys. And the Pep Boys is a $2 billion, 700-store retail chain employing tens of thousands of retail associates. And Pep Boys was really the first company that understood that the way they were delivering information to their employees was not effective in terms of impacting behavior. This is the very first area of knowledge that they chose to tackle when rolling out a technology solution to the employee group. And the topic area was inventory shrink, or in other words, theft of merchandise, which in retail tends to be, the majority of it tends to be employee theft of merchandise. So Pep Boys believed that most of their employees understood very well all of the concepts around inventory shrink, including how to report it if they observed it in another employee, what the consequences were, how to report it on their anonymous tips line, things like that. And they were astounded to discover that the first iteration of questions in the area of inventory theft only were answered 48% of the time correctly. They couldn't believe that only 48% of the staff understood the core concepts in what they believe to be a very simple topic area. And as you can see, by the 5th iteration of questions in the area of inventory shrink, 98% of them were being answered correctly. And that had a very measurable impact on a financial statement line. Specifically, they saw very, very quickly a 60% increase in quality calls to that anonymous tip line where employees were reporting other employees for theft. And that translated into a 55% reduction in inventory shrink, which in their case translated into tens of millions of dollars a year. On the other side, they also tackled another very common area of loss in retail, which is health and safety claims. And they saw their claim counts come down by 40%, which again translated into tens of millions of dollars a year. So here's how the employee logs on and sees how many points that they can earn for answering questions in that session. It's a 3-minute, typically a 3-minute session per day. They select a game to play as part of the experience, and embedded in each game are questions, and you can see over to the left top side in the UFO at the top, there's a question mark. So questions go through the game, and the employee actually hits the question marks at points. Questions pop up that are targeted to knowledge that employee specifically needs to have to do their job well. So the employee reads the question. There could be pictures, videos attached to the question. They answer the question on the spot. They get instant feedback as to whether or not they got it right or wrong. They accumulate points for answering questions correctly or incorrectly, and those points can then be used and redeemed for rewards that the employer makes available to them. They can bid or they can buy rewards typically. And then they get the opportunity to see where they sit on leaderboards. They can be put on teams by department, by location, a variety of ways to do that. And so there again is that sort of competitive intrinsic motivation. And the employer gets a deep set of analytics that shows employee by employee, topic area by topic area, iteration by iteration, who knows what and who doesn't know what, so that they can address learning that is not happening, but also be able to measure learning that is, and actually have an audit trail that shows who has acquired what knowledge in which topic areas, and then be able to tie those results to various financial statement outcomes. For example, in sales, top salespeople, how are they performing answering questions, and is that translating into increased product sales? So in this particular graph, you see a little bit deeper analytics, and you'll see the names at the bottom of that screen. You can drill into every single person and their level of success, how long it's been taking them, and get a sense in the histogram above of how many of the employees are actually in the program. So finally, if you employ these concepts of retrieval-based learning, spaced repetition, add in the gamification and the fun, you can reinforce core content that employees actually need to remember, create an environment where they actually learn it, it gets transferred, which becomes operationally employed and their behavior changes without them even realizing that they're doing the right thing. They just instantly recall the right answer, and therefore they do it because people do what they remember. And we've seen vast cultural shift on the part of the employees within the environments. We have employers say all of the time that employees are absolutely loving the experience and do have the motivation to want to get on and have that 3-minute experience every day. And when they do and when they learn, it translates into some very, very measurable financial statement outcomes for the employer. So weaving it into the workday as it makes sense for that employee's workflow can result in a vastly improved performance and a bottom line result. And with that, I'll stop there and ask if there are any questions.
Amazing demonstration. I would like to say, I think that the idea of repetition, especially in short bursts of information, is something that very much interests and is really kind of the main talk right now in the world of performance support and a continuous learning experience. And so thank you very much. I think that same idea, though maybe expressed in perhaps from a slightly different perspective, will definitely be part of the presentation that we will be about to see. It's from Ari Tamam of WalkMe. Ari, please take it away.
I'm Tamam, and I'm the Enterprise Sales Director for Training here at WalkMe. And also thank you, Carol, for that insightful presentation with all of that scientific information. That's really helpful, because what I'm going to do now is to throw out all sorts of numbers and statistics about the numerous studies conducted by many reliable bodies, and here they are. So you can see that there's lots of information there on the screen about trained users being more productive. Here's the first one there being 1 trained user equals 6 untrained users. I think really this is a no, because at the end of the day, we all know that well-trained employees are always more effective and productive. The bottom line is that this improves the company's revenue stream, reduces employee turnover, and pushes up profit margins. So it really is a no-brainer. Training is an essential part of growing our business efficiencies. Otherwise, why would companies spend more than $125 billion on training alone last year? And that was only American companies. So the question is really, how do we do this effectively at reasonable costs? We've heard some great ideas from Axonify about spacing out the information grab, keeping it into small bits, repetitive tasks, etc., which are great in improving the effectiveness of training given. If money was no object, we could even try one further extreme and try having an expert sit with each and every employee to guide them through whatever process that is unfamiliar to them or that they haven't got to grips with. Well, that would be ideal, wouldn't it? But no one really has that deep pocket. Let's have a look at the common scenario where you have an employee. In this case, let's take Mark, who has just completed 3 days of training on operating his company's CRM software in the telecommunications industry. He started working there a couple of weeks ago and has already completed his training. Mark's boss, Carol, really expects him to hit the ground running and to begin showing results quickly. But she's also aware of the often quoted statistic that, on average, people only remember about 20% of what they've learned during training sessions. Now, even if Mark absorbed 50% of the information that he's learned, he's still liable to make a series of mistakes and repeatedly ask for assistance in the initial period following the completion of his training. This doesn't just waste some of his time, but also the time of his colleagues that he's bothering to get assistance from. So his boss, Carol, is fairly reserved about Mark's initial progress and is looking forward to the day that he will become fully comfortable and efficient in operating the CRM software effectively. A central challenge of employee development is really in bridging the gap between the knowledge attained during a training session, let's say in the classroom for employees, and the moment at which these employees can perform their required tasks independently and efficiently. Although employees learn a lot during training, once the initial process ends, much of that knowledge is lost, and full competence is still far from achieved. It's not that the trainer is at fault or the design of the training or the instructional process is at fault. It's simply the way the human mind absorbs information. Even the most engaging and well-executed training event that will still involve a proficiency gap. Even experienced learning and development leaders recognize this basic fact that most learning takes place beyond the initial formal training sessions. So practice makes perfect, and once you've gone through that initial training session, the more you do repeat those tasks, the more familiar you are going to get with them. So whether it's a child learning how to ride a bicycle or whether it's an adult learning a particular software application, training does take time, and the more we do repeat that, the more perfectionist we become. How many of you out there remember Star Trek? Remember the Doctor from Voyager? Well, he was a hologram, a live speaking hologram. Here he is. But hologram all the same. And as a hologram, you wouldn't necessarily have to pay him a salary. So without having to pay him a salary, that could be the expert sitting next to each individual employee and helping them get through any of those unfamiliar tasks. But unfortunately, this technology doesn't really exist yet, so we do have to spend money. But if you could have a live experienced super user distributed amongst all your employees at no cost, that would be a perfect scenario. But money or other cost is a critical factor in what we do, and the methods we choose to train our employees does depend on the cost and the cost effectiveness of that. So the best practice and most effective methods is what we should be striving to achieve in order to lower our training costs and get the maximum for every dollar spent. So let's have a look at the technology. It isn't quite a speaking hologram, but it's not too far from that. Here we have WalkMe's performance support. Different people have coined different phrases, but the two central words here really are performance support, because some may call it in-process performance support, some may call it online or electronic performance support, but ultimately performance support is what training managers provide to their employees after they've completed formal classroom training. WalkMe's enterprise SaaS platform is exactly that. It provides performance support to all employees that need it by simply requesting it on screen, without interfering or impacting the performance of the actual application the employee is using. Because WalkMe is a transparent overlay on top of the application, it needs no integration, it has no effect on the application being used, and this is completely employee driven. So those employees that need the assistance can select the process online and get guidance, and those export employees can just simply ignore it. With WalkMe, whether the employee is familiar with the process or not, they can simply click open a menu, as you can see the player in the right-hand corner here, and choose a process that they need to execute, upon which a series of tip balloons will appear on the screen, instructing the user, or rather the employee, with exactly what action they need to take. Whether it's to enter some data, click a link, complete a form, or create a design, the WalkMe balloons provide exact, precise instructions to guide the employee step by step and eliminate any errors in execution. So let's have a look at a live example, and bear with me while I switch my screens and show you what a live CRM example would look like. And what I'm going to bring up on the screen here is my Salesforce application, which is a commonly used CRM application. And here you can see on the left-hand or the right-hand side of the screen a need help console. This is essentially the menu of processes that we've created for employees using Salesforce. Click on this and see I can choose from any one of the number of processes that are common to working with Salesforce. Let's just choose the second one here, how to create a new task. I simply click on the item, and as soon as I do so, the first balloon comes up and even scrolls the screen down automatically to show me where I need to click. And it's simply a question of clicking on New. This will then take us to the next screen, where when the balloon comes up, it tells me that I need to assign a task. So this is already assigned to me, so I'm just going to click on the next button here, and then put in the task name. Here we go, test task. And then you can see that the screen has it's just actually typed that in. And here you can see that the next balloon has already appeared, asking me to choose a status. So we can change the status here. We can also choose a priority level. And you can see that I'm still following the instructions on the screen that the balloons are providing me with. So it really is a very simple way to just continue executing your tasks while you're learning how to do that task, because you've got the balloons telling you what you need to do without you having to deviate from any simple process whatsoever. And there you go. You get a little welcome message saying, congratulations, your task has been added, and I can just click on the done, and I've completed that process without any attrition, without having to bother any of my colleagues, or without having to ask for assistance from any super user. So this is what we define as performance support, because this would happen in the real world where employees have completed their training and come to apply what they've learned in their day-to-day jobs. And this is an ideal substitute for, say, that hologram to be able to provide assistance on an ongoing, permanent basis to those employees that may need it. So, with that said, let's go back to our presentation and jump to where we left off. So what I've just shown you is as close as we can get to, say, a talking holographic expert, because the expert is on the screen. So it's not quite that person that's going to be sitting next to you, but it is close. And you can see that whatever has been missing from the employee in the classroom and has not been able to retain or has got written in his notes, they can just simply carry on with what they've learned and absorb more information by repeating those tasks on the screen, but using the assistance provided by the walkthrough balloons, and execute those tasks without any further assistance. So if any of you would be interested in seeing WalkMe in a live demo for your own applications, simply contact us at www.walkme.com and we'll be able to set a demo up for you. So I thank you all for your time and hope this has been interesting for you all. And I'll pass it back to Jason now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ari, also for your presentation was very interesting and engaging. I think both presentations today were like that. It's really, I think, the importance of specificity and relevancy, directly applying knowledge that you're transferring to the employee in the moment of need, so that he or she can be able to apply it, you know, within their everyday tasks, I think is very important. And I think it helps to make that direct link between training and performance, which is the topic of our webinar today. I would like to once again thank our two speakers. That's Carol Leaman, President and CEO of Axonify, as well as Mr. Ari Tamam, the Enterprise Sales for Training Director at WalkMe. Both of your presentations, I hope that the viewers will find very valuable. You can see on the screen if anybody else has any further questions for either Ari or for Carol or for myself. You can see the websites of each website. I again blog at Training Station. You can see Ari at RET@walkme.com, and Carol is at cleeman@axonify.com. I would like to thank everybody all for coming today. It's very much appreciated, and we hope you found the webinar discussion valuable for you. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day.